The wind had a voice here. It screamed through the canyons of ice, hurling needles of frozen dust across a wasteland that shimmered like glass under a gray sun. Elara Voss pressed onward, wrapped in layers scavenged from the wreckage of a crashed survey pod. The crystal shard at her chest, once a smooth relic, now pulsed unevenly, like a heart struggling to keep rhythm with the earth. Each pulse answered something in the distance. Her compass spun uselessly. The map projected by her wrist device showed only blank white, then flickers of static that resolved into geometric lines, sigils that hadn't existed yesterday. The aliens, she realized, weren't just communicating through light. They were rewriting geography. She climbed a ridge glazed with blue ice. The plateau below her seemed ordinary at first, endless snowdrifts and a frozen lake. But when she wiped frost from her visor, she saw them, 5 black monoliths piercing the horizon, vibrating faintly like tuning forks driven into the world. Each beam of light that touched them fractured into prismatic halos that arced across the sky. The resonant pillars. Her breath caught. The energy signature matched the readings from the buried city. Whatever had awakened beneath was migrating north, through her, perhaps, or through the shard itself. Elara's earpiece crackled. A man's voice, faint and panicked, cut through the static. "Dr. Voss, if you're hearing this, you're not alone up there." Then silence. She turned, scanning the whiteout. Nothing but wind and distance. Yet the shard at her chest flared again, this time in response to something behind her. A silhouette moved between gusts, tall, skeletal, limbed with gold light. Not human. Not solid, either. It shimmered in and out of existence like heat over sand. Elara stumbled backward, slipped, and slid down the ridge. The being didn't follow. Instead, it raised an arm, no, a limb of radiance, and the ice beneath her lit up in a web of lines. A low harmonic note trembled through the ground, deep enough to shake her bones. She realized the pillars weren't passive structures. They were instruments. And someone, or something, was starting to play them. The sound grew clearer the closer she moved, low, rhythmic, like a whale song made of thunder. The snow at her boots trembled in time. Each beat sent ripples of pale light through the ice, tracing veins that converged at the foot of the nearest pillar. Up close, the structure was no simple stone. Its surface was a translucent alloy, polished yet scarred by time. Symbols moved inside it, flowing like molten script. When Elara reached out, her glove hummed, the shard in her chest answered, flashing the same pattern. A gust tore her hood back, and for an instant she saw her reflection in the pillar, not her face, but a dozen versions of it, stretched through ages she didn't recognize. Voices overlapped inside her skull. "You carry the seed. The conduit has not closed." She stumbled away, gasping. The wind devoured the voices, but the message stayed. The shard's glow intensified until the ice around her cracked. Beneath the fissure, light coiled upward, no longer mere radiance but liquid, alive. The ground gave way. Elara fell through darkness into a cavern of frozen light. Walls of crystalline ice formed a cathedral large enough to house a city. Suspended in the center was something that did not belong to Earth, a ship, or perhaps a living machine. Its hull was smooth and iridescent, engraved with spirals that pulsed like heartbeats. Tendrils of light reached from it to each pillar above, feeding energy upward. Her fall slowed as gravity itself softened. The shard lifted from her chest, pulled toward the vessel. Every instinct screamed to grab it back, yet she couldn't move, every nerve vibrated in harmony with the sound. Then she saw them. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of the light beings encased in translucent cocoons along the walls. Their shapes shifted between forms, human outlines 1 second, starlit geometry the next. Frozen. Waiting. "Not dead," she whispered. "Sleeping." The shard floated to the ship's surface and locked into a recess shaped exactly for it. The harmonics leapt an octave. Light cascaded through the cavern, tearing frost from the walls. One by one, the cocoons cracked. Conduit restored. Cycle resumes. The voices were everywhere now, layered and resonant. Elara backed away, shielding her eyes. The pillars above answered with a scream of energy that ripped through the storm. And then, silence. She opened her eyes. The beings were awake. They hovered, weightless, bodies of refracted light and shadow, watching her with eyes like collapsing suns. A single figure drifted closer, its voice directly inside her mind. "You freed us. Now you will see what light costs." A rush of images struck her, cities burning under auroras, oceans boiling, stars collapsing. The ship wasn't a vessel, it was a gate, and she had just turned the key. The chamber shook. Ice cracked above as a beam of energy shot skyward through the pillars, punching a hole through the storm clouds and into orbit. When the tremor stopped, the alien figure reached out. Its touch was weightless but left a burn of white fire on her wrist. "You are mocked. You cannot outrun what you woke." The pillars began to fold inward, melting back into the earth. The ship dimmed, retracting the shard into its core. Elara fell to her knees, breathless, frost steaming from her lips. Above, the hole in the clouds still glowed, an open wound in the sky. She looked up, realization slicing through fear. If that beam reached space, it wasn't just a signal. It was an invitation. The light in the clouds didn't fade. It deepened, twisting into a vortex of gold and blue that spun faster than any storm Elara had ever seen. The air itself became electric, pulling her hair toward the sky. Static arced between the shattered ice spires as if the atmosphere were tearing apart. She stumbled through the snow toward the surface tunnel she'd fallen through, the ground shaking under her boots. The once solid glacier had turned liquid beneath a thin crust, each step cracking through like glass. The beam that had lanced into the sky was still burning upward, an unbroken column of brilliance connecting Earth and space. And something was answering it. A flicker appeared at the top of the beam, first a speck, then a widening glow. It was descending, impossibly fast, but without sound. As it neared, the clouds bent inward, pulled by a gravitational force that shouldn't have existed. Elara ran. Chunks of ice the size of houses tumbled around her. The wind howled with voices, the same harmonic language she'd heard below, now distorted and furious. She could feel the mark on her wrist burning through her glove, searing with every pulse of the descending light. She reached the ridge she'd first climbed that morning. From there, the whole frozen plain stretched before her, and in its center, the resonant pillars were folding downward like closing fingers. Energy from them bled into the crater below where she'd seen the alien vessel. The object in the sky was almost here. At first, she thought it was another ship, but as it broke through the atmosphere, she saw it was no vessel at all. It was a being, enormous and radiant, its shape fluctuating between winged geometry and living plasma. Its presence turned the air to sound, a pressure that made her ribs ache. The shard inside the buried gate answered with a flare so bright it blinded her. "Conduit detected," the voice thundered, no longer inside her mind but vibrating the ground. "Cycle incomplete. Ascension requires balance." The frozen plain exploded in a shockwave of light. Elara threw herself behind a slab of ice as the wave hit, hurling shards and snow in every direction. When she dared to look again, the great being had landed, or rather, hovered, above the crater. Its tendrils reached into the pillars, draining them of light, then turned toward her. The mark on her wrist pulsed violently, pulling her forward as if her body no longer belonged entirely to her. "You hold the fragment," the voice said. "You opened the path. You will finish what your kind began." Elara screamed against the wind. "I don't even know what I did." The creature leaned closer, its form flickering through countless faces, human, alien, unrecognizable. "Then learn. The light remembers." In a burst of sound, the creature struck the ground. A wave of energy surged outward, freezing time itself for a heartbeat. The snow hung in the air, motionless. Elara saw visions in the frozen fragments, cities of light suspended over alien seas, and the same pillars stretching across another world. The shards of vision dissolved. Time snapped back. The creature vanished into the beam, ascending again. But the gate beneath the ice stayed open. The ground beneath her feet began to collapse into a spiraling pit of golden light. She turned and ran, faster than she ever had. Behind her, the resonant pillars detonated, columns of flame and light shooting skyward, melting the tundra into steam. She dove behind a ridge just as the entire plain erupted, a shock wave hurling her into the air. The world went white. When she came to, the storm was gone. The pillars had vanished. The crater glowed faintly where the gate had been, like a heartbeat deep under the earth. And above it, in the night sky, a new star burned, golden and unnatural. Elara stared up, realizing with a chill that it wasn't a star at all. It was a signal. And somewhere beyond the atmosphere, something had answered. She whispered into the cold. God help us, it's coming. The wind carried her words into silence. After the signal, the world had gone perfectly still. Elara blinked against the glare. Snowflakes hung motionless around her, each one refracting the strange new light that poured from the sky. The air tasted metallic, humming with low-frequency sound that thrummed against her teeth. She pushed herself up on trembling arms. The heat from the explosion had melted a shallow basin of water beneath her, and steam rose in thin white threads. Her suit's visor flickered, struggling to recalibrate. Radiation warnings screamed across the display, then died as the circuitry fried. She tore the helmet off and sucked in the thin, freezing air. It burned her lungs but felt real, the first solid proof she hadn't been vaporized. Above her, the golden beam had collapsed into a spiral of clouds. At its center, the false star pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat. Each pulse sent ripples of aurora spilling across the sky. They weren't ordinary northern lights. The colors moved with intent, tracing lines that formed symbols she half recognized from the alien vessel below. The light was writing across the heavens. Elara staggered to her feet. Around her, the tundra had transformed. The smooth plains of ice were carved into concentric rings of black glass, each ring glowing faintly from beneath. In the middle of that circle, the crater still smoked, a wound in the earth leaking warmth and light. Her earpiece crackled. "Lara. Dr. Voss, do you read me?" She froze. The voice was faint, distorted, but human. "This is Argus Station. We picked up an energy discharge over your coordinates. Are you alive down there?" Elara pressed the comm unit to her mouth. "Argus, this is Voss. I'm here. The site, the pillars, they're gone. Something else came through. You need to." The channel dissolved into static. Behind the interference, another tone emerged, a deep harmonic identical to the one she'd heard in the underground chamber. Not interference. Translation. The mark on her wrist began to glow again, lines of light crawling up her arm beneath the skin. She clutched it, gritting her teeth as the pain flared. Images spilled across her vision, metallic forests, oceans of glass, creatures of light soaring between fractured moons. Not memories. Coordinates. Whatever had answered the signal was sending directions. The snow beneath her boots cracked. Something vast shifted beneath the ice. A column of light speared upward a few hundred meters away, accompanied by the groan of rending metal. When the light faded, she saw a shape forcing itself through the glacier, smooth, curved, the size of a skyscraper. It wasn't the gate she'd opened before. This was new. The surface split open like an egg, and from within rose a structure made of translucent alloy. Segments unfolded and locked into place, forming a ring that hovered a meter above the ice. Lines of light raced along its circumference, pulsing in rhythm with the false star overhead. "Cycle 2 initiated," a voice whispered, not into her ears but directly into the world itself. Elara stumbled backward. The mark on her wrist brightened until it threw a beam toward the ring. The two pulses synchronized. "No, no, no," she muttered. "Not again." She tried to run, but gravity shifted, light bent around her, the air thickening like water. The ring expanded, spinning faster, drawing in the frozen air and shattered debris. In its core, a void opened, black, depthless, humming with energy. The harmonic rose to a pitch that made her bones ache. The ice cracked beneath her feet, shards of glowing frost lifted into the air, orbiting the ring. She could feel it pulling at her, through her. The conduit was still active, and she was its anchor. Elara screamed into the storm, forcing her body forward against the suction. "You want your conduit? Then take it." She reached for a fragment of the broken pillar half buried in snow, a sliver of alien alloy still glowing with residual light. As she raised it toward the ring, the voices in her head crescendoed. "Cycle 2 incomplete. Balance must be restored." The fragment melted in her hand, fusing with her skin. The pain was blinding, but the pull ceased. The ring stabilized, its rotation slowing until it hovered silently, a perfect circle of golden fire. For a heartbeat, everything was calm. Then, from within the ring, a shadow appeared, tall, angular, unmistakably alive. Elara staggered back. The figure stepped through the golden threshold, light streaming from its limbs like smoke. Unlike the being she'd seen before, this one had shape and substance, armor of glass, eyes burning with white flame. It looked directly at her. "Conduit found," it said in a voice made of thunder and breath. "Prepare the world." The ring collapsed. The shockwave threw her to the ground. When she looked up again, the figure was gone, leaving only molten footprints leading toward the horizon. Elara lay motionless, snow falling softly around her, heart hammering in the silence that followed. Above her, the false star pulsed again, 3 times, deliberate. Somewhere out there, across the void, something had heard and answered. She whispered to the empty air, voice shaking. "Then it's already begun." The footprints burned through the ice like scars. Each step shimmered for a few seconds before freezing again, glowing faintly beneath the crust. Elara followed them across the tundra, fighting the ache in her legs and the sharp bite of the wind. The storm had passed, but the air was heavier now, charged, almost listening. A dark line appeared on the horizon, the comm tower of Outpost Raven, a remote logistics hub she remembered from the expedition maps. If anyone else had survived the magnetic blast, they'd be there. She pressed on. By the time she reached the perimeter fence, the false star had climbed higher, painting the snow in pale gold. The outpost was still intact, 6 modules half buried in drifted snow, power lights flickering. She banged on the nearest airlock. A moment later, the hatch wheel turned. A man in a torn parka peered out, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Who the hell, Dr. Voss?" Elara sagged with relief. "Mason. You're alive." He pulled her inside. The interior was dim, the hum of generators uneven. Another survivor, Ngwin, the communications tech, was crouched over a console that spat sparks every few seconds. "We picked up your signal," Mason said. "Then, that thing in the sky. Every satellite's dead. You know what's happening." Elara swallowed hard. "Not exactly. But it's not over." As if on cue, the lights flickered. A low tone rolled through the base, too deep to be feedback. The mark on her wrist flared again. Outside, through the frosted viewport, the snow began to lift off the ground, drawn upward by invisible hands. Ngwin whispered, "Please tell me that's wind." Elara looked. The footprints she'd followed were glowing again, brighter this time, leading straight to the outpost. The air above them rippled like heat. A figure stepped through the distortion, the envoy. Up close, it was more terrible and beautiful than she remembered. Translucent armor patterned with flowing runes, a halo of white fire around its head. Its feet hovered just above the snow, leaving trails of light that melted through metal. Mason raised his rifle. "Stop. Don't come any closer." The envoy didn't react. Its voice filled the room without sound. "Cycle 2 begins. Integration required." The window burst inward. A wave of force knocked Mason and Ngwin to the floor. Elara stood frozen as the envoy's gaze fixed on her. The mark on her wrist burned so brightly it cast shadows. "You carry the link. You will open the way." She backed toward the inner corridor. "I can't. I don't even know how." The envoy extended a hand. The air shimmered, every screen in the room came alive, flashing symbols of light. The comms console spat static that turned into words. "Planetary network detected, adapting biological relay." Ngwin shouted over the noise. "It's using our systems. It's rewriting the satellite grid through her." Elara clenched her arm, trying to break the connection, but the mark pulsed harder. The envoy's voice filled her head. "Fear not. You are not host. You are horizon." Outside, the false star flared. Lines of gold light arced from the sky to the horizon, spider-webbing across the ice. Each line terminated in a small burst, hundreds of them, like seeds taking root. Mason crawled to the emergency panel and slammed the manual override. Steel shutters dropped over the windows. The lights went red. "If it wants the grid, we cut power." "No." The generators died. The hum vanished. Darkness fell. For a moment, silence. Then, from outside, a sound like distant thunder, deep, rhythmic, many voices chanting in harmony. The shutters glowed faintly as the light outside intensified. Gwyn whispered, "It's not leaving, is it?" Elara shook her head. "No. It's calling others." A sudden crack split the floor. Veins of gold light raced through the metal plating. Mason grabbed Elara's arm. "We've got to get out." They ran into the corridor, boots echoing. The emergency hatch at the far end led to a maintenance tunnel that sloped toward the ice field. The door controls were dead, but Elara's mark reacted. Panels flickered and unlocked at her touch. Outside again, the night was alive with motion. Beams of light speared down from the sky where each of the seeds had landed. Within those beams, shapes coalesced, hundreds of envoys forming simultaneously across the tundra. Elara felt her knees give way. Mason caught her, staring in horror. "It's an army." She looked up at the sky. The false star had expanded, its edges fracturing into multiple points. Not one light, many ships, descending through the auroras. "Integration," whispered the envoy's voice, carried on the wind. "Balance restored through unity." Elara's vision blurred. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the chant echoing across the frozen plain. For a heartbeat she saw what they saw, Earth wrapped in filaments of light, every network, every signal connected. Then the vision shattered. She collapsed in the snow, gasping. Mason pulled her up. "Whatever this is, we run. Now." They stumbled toward the distant ridge, the outpost behind them dissolving in golden fire. Above, the sky rained light. Behind them, the envoy watched, expression unreadable, and whispered one final phrase that only Elara could hear. "The horizon walks. The dawn begins." The ridge looked closer than it was. The cold made every step heavier, every breath a knife. Behind them, Outpost Raven was gone, a crater of molten light where steel and snow had once stood. The wind no longer howled, it sang, carrying faint harmonics that shifted in pitch, matching the pulse of the false star above. Elara half fell, half climbed up the ridge's slope, Mason gripping her arm to keep her upright. Every few seconds, he glanced back. The sky was alive, no longer dark but threaded with rivers of gold, descending like auroras made of liquid fire. When they reached the crest, they stopped dead. Beyond the ridge, the tundra was moving. Dozens of circular lights were forming in the snow, like glowing crop circles burning through the ice. From each one, a figure was emerging, humanoid at first glance, but not quite. Their bodies rippled with translucent armor, their faces shifting between human and alien forms like unfinished reflections. The envoys were replicating, multiplying across the landscape in perfect symmetry. "Jesus," Mason whispered. "They're growing." Elara's voice trembled. "Not growing. Spreading." She looked down at her wrist. The mark had stopped glowing, but she could feel it thrum under her skin like a second heartbeat. Each time one of the envoys rose, it pulsed faintly, answering in resonance. Mason pointed toward the far horizon, where streaks of fire cut through the clouds. "Those aren't meteors, are they?" She shook her head. "No. They're arrivals." A new noise split the air, a deep, vibrating hum that made the ridge shudder beneath their feet. The ground fissured, and geysers of steam shot upward. From one of the glowing circles below, a structure was emerging. Not built, but grown, pillars of crystalline metal unfolding like flowers, connected by arcs of light. It was identical to the architecture Elara had seen in the visions, the alien cities suspended over alien seas. "They're building the same thing here," she breathed. "They're terraforming." Mason clenched his fists. "Then we find a way to stop them." Elara almost laughed, but it came out as a sob. "Stop them." "Mason, they're rewriting physics." He turned to her, eyes steady despite the chaos. "Then we start with surviving long enough to tell someone who can." A sudden crack echoed behind them, boots crunching snow. They spun around. A group of people was climbing the ridge from the opposite side, survivors from another nearby outpost, wrapped in heavy suits and dragging crates of equipment. "Dr. Voss," one of them shouted. "We picked up your distress beacon. What the hell's happening?" Before Elara could answer, the false star pulsed again, brighter than ever. Every light on the ridge flickered. Radios screamed static. The survivors clutched their heads, wincing. And then, one by one, their eyes rolled white. Mason stepped forward. "Hey, hey! What's wrong with them? Elara could only stare in horror as the survivors straightened, in perfect unison. Their voices spoke together, layered and deep. Integration protocol in progress. Resistance unnecessary. Elara backed away. It's controlling them. Mason raised his rifle but hesitated. The people they'd just seen, their faces were calm, almost peaceful. They started walking toward Elara and Mason in synchronization, their movements unervingly smooth. Join. Harmony ensures survival. A sudden flash of gold split the sky. The ground beneath the synchronized survivors fractured, and from it, a different light emerged. This one was blue. The ground erupted, throwing them backward. A shape burst from the ice, a sleek, human-made drone the size of a car, spinning through the air before stabilizing mid-flight. A voice blared through a built-in speaker, robotic but distinctly human. UN Defense Unit Sigma, 3 responding to anomalous incursion. Identify yourselves. Elara shouted, Dr. Elara Voss, Research Division, Station 3. You need to evacuate. Before she could finish, a beam of golden light struck the drone, slicing it clean in half. The explosion knocked them both down. When the smoke cleared, only charred fragments remained. Mason coughed, covering his face. So much for rescue. Elara grabbed his arm. There's still a chance. The beacon signal, if it reached orbit before the shutdown, someone knows we're here. Mason looked up at the sky, where the false star now flickered with thousands of tiny sparks, each one spreading across the atmosphere. Yeah, he said quietly. But they're coming here too. The synchronized humans were still advancing, unaffected by the blast. Behind them, the envoy city continued to rise, a vast structure of shifting geometry, its core glowing with blinding light. Elara felt the mark on her wrist ignite again. Pain surged through her arm, her vision warping into streaks of color. She saw flashes, orbiting stations, human satellites, and something feeding through them, consuming data, energy, communication. The aliens weren't just landing. They were wiring themselves into the planet. She screamed as the visions overwhelmed her. Mason caught her, shaking her shoulders. Elara, what do you see? Through gritted teeth, she gasped, they're using the global grid. Everything with a signal, they're turning it into part of their network. Mason's expression hardened. Then we go dark. No tech. Nothing they can use. He tore a communications pack off his shoulder and smashed it against a rock. Elara nodded weakly, trying to steady her breath. The pain in her arm eased, but the glowing mark remained, dim, yet alive. From the valley below, a massive shadow passed across the snow. The envoys had stopped moving. They turned, all at once, toward the horizon. Something else was arriving. Through the clouds, a shape descended, enormous, triangular, and pulsing with alternating bands of light and shadow. It dwarfed the structures below, a floating fortress made of living matter. The ground vibrated as it came to rest above the alien city, its lower surface splitting open to reveal spiraling machinery that reached for the earth like tendrils. Mason stared in disbelief. That's not a ship. That's a city. Elara whispered, No. It's a harvest engine. The synchronized humans dropped to their knees, faces turned skyward. The envoys began to hum in resonance, their voices merging into one vast chord that shook the air. Elara grabbed Mason's hand. We need to move now. They ran down the opposite side of the ridge, the light chasing them, snow turning to steam under their feet. As they reached the bottom, the ground behind them erupted in a blinding flare. The false star dimmed. The alien fortress began to descend. And the sky, once blue, once human, burned gold. It's starting, Elara whispered. The awakening.